So Barry Soetoro, a.k.a. Barack Obama, while campaigning for Kamala Harris, had a lot to say to so-called black men.
I'm going to go ahead and just speak some truths, if you don't mind. Because my understanding, based on reports I'm getting from campaigns and communities, is that we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable.
Well, I like to say this is my official response. On Wednesday, July 31st, Donald Trump, speaking at a forum for the National Association of Black Journalists, said this.
Sir, do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is.
And my thoughts were, is he wrong though? What Donald Trump was trying to not so elegantly explain was a political concept known as identity politics.
It is one of the oldest tricks in politics.
Now, before I go on, I got to make myself clear in order for you to understand certain basic concepts of identity politics. A quick Google search will show you that the word black as an identity is a socio-political term. Identity politics is politics based on a particular identity, such as ethnicity, race, nationality, religion, denomination, gender, sexual orientation, social background, caste, and social class. Now, if you do further research on the topic of black being a socio-political term, you will find that the government's own definition of black is a person having origin in any of the black racial groups of Africa. It includes any people whom indicate their race as black or African American, or report entries such as African American, Kenyan, Nigerian, or Haitian. And if you research even further, you will see part of an individual's preference to identify as black over African American is a socio-political and historical choice. The word black as an identity is a socio-political term, which means identifying yourself as black and or white is bullshit. There's no such thing as white, and there's no such thing as black outside the socio-political platform. Let me use the words from a very knowledgeable researcher as an example.
Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking. right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. Before we figured out there were other people to kill, we just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count. That's why.
Identity politics is a political tactic used by politicians and political pundits in order to gain favor from a specific voter base to benefit political campaigns and agendas. There's no greater example of a politician benefiting from identity politics than Barack Obama. Now, with that being said, Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Obama, benefited from the usage of identity politics in both of his political campaigns. Do you remember when I said,
y'all said, but Obama's mother is a so-called white woman. For 8 years, you motherfuckers have made it very clear that a so-called black man and a so-called white woman can make a so-called black president.
utilizing identity politics, many so-called black voters gave their vote to Barack Obama with the thought that a vote for Obama would be a benefit and a positive for the so-called collective black agenda. A vast number of so-called black voters motivated by identity politics voted for Barack Obama in both of his presidential elections. And how did that work out? But I digress. Utilizing identity politics, Kamala Harris has made it very clear publicly that she identifies as a South Asian American woman and has never officially identified as a black woman.
I stand before you as the first candidate for Vice President of the United States of South Asian descent.
Kamala Harris is also covertly using identity politics, especially in this presidential campaigning cycle, by allowing other so-called black political pundits and celebrities to identify herself as black. I myself have not found one video of a Kamala Harris speech in which she identifies herself as a so-called black woman. In fact, Kamala Harris strategically speaks around the topic of her so-called perceived blackness whenever said topic is raised. Another example of Kamala Harris purposely speaking around the issue of race can be seen in the September 10th, 2024 presidential debate.
I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent? Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race.
Now, this is the point where I break down another political tactic / tool / manipulation that is now being used by politicians and political pundits. In the early 20th century here in America, the highly racist and derogatory term colored people was used to classify and identify highly and mildly melanated people. Now, in the 21st century, those aligned with the woke agenda, such as politicians, political pundits, celebrities, and entertainers, are now using the equally racist and ridiculous catchphrase, people of color.
People of color.
All people of color.
People of color.
People of color.
Women of color.
Women of color.
Women of colors.
Person of color.
Person of color.
Woman of color.
Women of color. People of color.
People of color.
People of color.
People of color.
People of color.
Person of color.
People of color.
But very few people know and understand that that term is political manipulation and blanket terminology used to suit a political agenda. I.e., if we can't pass Kamala Harris as black by her own words, then she's certainly a person of color. So the recent advent of the racialist term, people of color, into our socio-political lexicon draws a defined line. If you're not white, you're certainly people of color. That is a political manipulation. People of color. Stop saying that shit.
I also find it confusing that you're enlightened if you say people of color, yet you're a bigot if you say colored people. Those are the same words. You switch the order, that doesn't change the meaning. Like if someone came out and was like, you're a filthy Jew, I wouldn't be like, hey, I am a Jew of filth, all right? Gotta switch those words around, get woke, come on.
Now, I've found many videos and publications of Kamala Harris admitting to being a South Asian woman. She makes it very clear that she identifies as a South Asian woman and was raised by her South Asian mom and family members.
Mother, who raised me and my sister, was a proud woman. She was a brown woman.
She was an Indian woman.
She was a woman with a heavy accent.
That was Indian?
She was a woman who many times people would overlook her or not take her seriously.
Because she was Indian?
Because of her accent.
Because she was Indian? Why is she not saying she's Indian?
And let's set aside the fact that her father is Jamaican of Irish descent. January 25th, 1972, at a Baptist church in Brooklyn, Shirley Chisholm announced her campaign for candidacy for the President of the United States.
I stand before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am black and proud.
In that clip, you've seen that Shirley Chisholm, also utilizing identity politics, made it very clear that she's a so-called black woman. That simple. So in conclusion, Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Obama, stop with the bullshit. You are the greatest example of the usage of identity politics as a manipulation and a political tactic, and how that identity politics strategy did not benefit those who were motivated to vote for you due to identity politics. How dare you try to point out, single out, call out, and target all so-called black men due to the manipulation of your so-called perceived blackness. Stop trying to use identity politics as a campaign strategy and deal with the issues. Speak of the policies and not the manipulations. Because identity politics is also a political tactic used when a politician can't run on the merits of their own policies. Now, it's obvious that I don't agree with Dr. Umar Johnson on many different issues. But most recently, he said something that I pretty much agree with.
Let Kamala Harris get that White House. The East Indian American will be the priority minority by the time she leaves the Oval Office.
Truth hurts. Somebody got to say this shit.